So on today's episode of Recruiting Roundtable, we're talking about something that I think all three of us here are very passionate about, which is engineering hiring. I have an amazing panel today to talk about this really important topic, which we all live and breathe pretty much every day. Joining us today, we have Tanmoy Saha, who was previously director of talent acquisition at Peloton, and Colin Buresh, head of talent at Deepscribe. Colin, Tan, thanks so much for joining. Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
All right. So let's start with some introductions. Please just kind of give a little quick background of yourself and we'll go from there. Why don't we start with Tan?
Sure. Hey, I'm Tan. Currently, I'm a free agent. My most recent job was I was a director of technical recruiting at Peloton. Before that, I was leading recruiting at WeWork, Uber, Jet.com, which got acquired by Walmart and Google. So I've been in the tech space for quite some time, like more than 10 years. So really looking forward to this podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Tan. Nice to meet you. Is that it? Have you ever worked anywhere else? You got like the hit list of all the great companies. So that's cool. Colin?
Yeah, my name is Colin Buresh. I got into recruiting, it was a while ago. It was actually not my first career out of college. So this was something that I actually found and intentionally pursued. I was right out of college, I was in the insurance industry. And then after a while, I found out that there was a job where you could help people get jobs. So I thought that was pretty awesome. And that's how I got into recruiting. First half of my career was in an agency setting. So I got to work for support quite a few amazing companies during growth phases. And then, second half has been working internally. Previous to this, I was a recruiting manager at Expanse. We grew to about 300 people, had an exit, wonderful journey. And I'm currently over at Deepscribe. We're an AI startup. And trying to do something similar again.
You're going to go 2 for 2, Colin. So Expanse was acquired by Peloton Networks. Is that correct?
It was.
Yeah. All right. Well, nice work. Nice work. Lastly, my name is Sean Nguyen. I'm the host of this podcast, also managing director at Rocket, also VP of sales for our sister company, HireFlow. I'm really passionate about this. I think I ran a tech, I was the CEO of a tech recruiting agency for about 3.5 years. I ran it up here in Toronto. I started kind of getting into tech. I was working at an iOS Android development shop where I was sitting with developers every day, which was great. I learned a ton. We were in the office every day, and I heard about a lot of the trials and tribulations of their interviewing process and working with recruiters and that type of thing. So, I'm excited to have this chat, and hopefully I can add something other than just asking the questions. So let's take a look at let's go back to the beginning. I know, Colin, you kind of mentioned a little bit about your start into recruiting. Tan, I kind of want to hear yours as well. Let's go back to the beginning. What kind of got you into this space?
Sure. So I would say this. I went to Vanderbilt on full ride. I was like, hey, I wanted to work for the UN, travel the world, save the hungry kids. That was my passion. And so all my internships were, working in like Uganda, in South Africa. So that's what I wanted to do. And when I graduated, that's when the big recession happened. And that's when I realized, I got to do a lot more than that to like pay my bills.
And this is what, 2007, 2008?
This is like afterward. So this is like 2010.
2010. Okay. Gotcha.
So it's like still, at the economy was at the recovering stage, but not quite. I didn't even know what recruiting was. It was a start where, going to a really preppy school. I remember one of my professors asked everyone in the class, like, raise your hand if you already have a job offer. And like 90% of the class raised their hand. And I was one of the few that didn't. I'm like, oh, shoot. Like, it's not just about getting into a good school, but also about like having those network and connections. Mm-hmm. And I remember being that kid in those career events where I would never approach a recruiter because I was always shy. I was always like standing in the corner. And so when I learned about that career, like in recruiting, like it was actually the alumni who I got to connect with, and he told me, "Hey, if you like helping people, solving problem, building product, you're essentially building product by hiring the right people to build those product." So then, kind of my mindset changed. Like, okay, so you're essentially building something, except instead of using tools or technology, you're using people to build those. So that's how I got into it. Started in the agency world, and then started to kind of get into like helping people to a point where I was getting invited to some of the engineers' houses, and my colleagues were like, "Okay, like what how are you building this relationship?" And I'm like, "Well, it comes down to like genuine interest of helping people." And the rest was history. You know, going from agency to startups, and then every other job, I just went from one referral to another. So other people I worked with, they referred me, and I kind of followed them, and rest is history.
That's awesome. And so, Colin, I know you mentioned you went from insurance to recruiting. So I'd love to hear about the decision making. And I think you also mentioned you started agency, right? So
I
maybe
did.
maybe you can answer, because both of you guys have went from agency to in-house. Was it just burnout, or were you just tired of like the grind of being at an agency? But I'd love to hear first about insurance to recruiting, and then why you went from agency in-house.
Yeah. I mean, insurance to recruiting was it was a pretty easy decision for me. I've read something that's I think is good perspective for any recruiters to have. If you look at the 5 most stressful times in any person's life, they're generally buying a house, birth of a child, death of a loved one, and on that list, I'm forgetting what the 4th one was, but on that number 5 was changing jobs, and that's one of the most stressful times in someone's life. So I think recruiting is a great opportunity for all of us to help support, right? Support somebody. And then I think, to piggyback on what Tan said, why would you go from in-house or from agency to in-house? It is exactly along the lines of what Tan was saying. It's an opportunity to be a part of building something. I mean, the things that we have the chance to build right now with technology, it's incredible. The advancements in artificial intelligence. I mean, I remember when I started recruiting, we were always hiring like server administrators, and then it became the cloud, and then, then security. Now we're doing so many things with artificial intelligence. The evolution in this industry, and to be a part of that, it's a huge opportunity. It's a lot of fun. So that was a pretty natural next progression for me, I felt.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know the company you're in, Deepscribe, you automate note taking, right, for physicians. It's
We do.
that's pretty serious business. Like if you make a mistake, like that's a life or death kind of thing, right? So
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting mission that your company is on. So I think that's awesome that you're doing that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's definitely meaningful, right? When you get done with work at the end of the day, you were a part of, trying to, what we call, bring the joy of care back to medicine. So right now, physicians spend at minimum 3 hours a day documenting their appointments with patients. If you can automate that, that's an opportunity for them to improve care, get time back to spend with their kids. It's all meaningful. They could do more research for each patient to bring better outcomes. There's a lot of opportunity there. And, there's future opportunity too. Can we, help surface more data at the point of care, which is a big effort that we can, take advantage of. So yeah, definitely meaningful work. And a lot of advancement in technology.
Yeah, for sure. So let's pivot now into the topic of kind of what we're here to talk about, which is building engineering teams. I want to start with you, Tan, because you started at Google, which is obviously a big brand. Like everyone wants to work at Google kind of thing. It's like the dream job. And then you go on to some other really great companies like Uber, WeWork. In particular, WeWork, I think you were there at a period where they were seeing pretty big growth, and as well Peloton, explosive growth through the pandemic, right? So I'd love to get your thoughts on generally how you approach building engineering teams, and does it change when, let's say, you have 50 engineers versus 500, and what are some of those like potential changes you have to consider when, interviewing and sourcing, and how you kind of build a pipeline of great engineering candidates? So I know it's a pretty loaded question, but
Yeah,
maybe you can take some of that down for us.
totally. I think in a way, Google was a good training ground in terms of like finding out what is a good engineer that has really good depth and specialization in their background. But then first transition out of Google was going to jet.com, where I was one of the early tech recruiter there. And it was, I was employee number, I would say like, in the hundreds. And then it grew to like 2000 plus. And so there you've quickly realized that the quality or the talent caliber that you bring in, if you just, if you look for the same talent or the type of team that worked for Google, it's not going to work at Jet. Essentially, at Google, for example, it's like depth versus breadth, right? For a large company, you're looking for talent that have a lot of depth, right? They are specializing in SRE, in SET, software engineering test, or like somebody who's super specialized in that tiny little feature in this, just the Google.com's little corner. They're, expert in that. Versus when you go to a smaller place, you're looking for depth as well as the breadth. And you're not going to find necessarily those talent all in those large companies. So that ecosystem of talent have to be adjusted, right? You still want to have some of those players that have a lot of depth. But again, to have the breadth, that's when you're going and looking at startups. That's when you're looking at talent that have experience from building things from scratch. So one of the things I always say is people get really impressed by like FANG backgrounds, like oh, somebody from FANG. And I challenge hiring managers or engineering leaders and say, yes, you do want to find those talent from those FANG, but the talent that actually builds something there, not necessarily maintain something, right? So if I was in a team, let's just say in Google Calendar, for example, and if they're part of building that team from a startup, like that's a valuable experience that you want to take it to a startup. Versus somebody who just went in and maintained something that 1,000 other engineers built, that skill is not necessarily going to translate. So you almost have to rethink what is it that my organization need, and have a talent strategy based on where you are right now.
That totally makes sense. Colin, what have you seen? Whether it's at Expanse or at Deepscribe, and has your like approach or philosophy changed to how you recruit engineers?
I mean, it's constantly evolving. I mean, we have a lot of challenges in the market, and I think since about 2022, it's been a roller coaster of a market. So talent strategy is always evolving for sure. At startups, I mean, we're going to have the same challenges as every company, like trying to identify the best talent that we can, trying to make sure that we can attract it. And I think there is one additional challenge, which I'm sure Tan ran into as well, and that's nobody knows who you are. So you're competing with the Googles of the world, the FANGs of the world, trying to procure talent, and they've not heard of you. They've definitely heard of Google. So you can run into a lot of challenges. So I mean, how do you compete with that? How do you do that? Well, there was a very interesting study by Deloitte, and we kind of follow these principles. Deloitte found there were 5 top reasons why somebody's going to leave a job. Compensation is in the top 5, but it's not number 1. It was number 2. So if you want to be able to identify that top talent, you were going to, through the interview process, want to appeal to, one of these 4 other areas, and really position yourself as, hey, we're going to help you launch a career, or we're going to help give you these broad, big projects where Ken was saying, at Google, you might have a very narrow scope of project. So yeah, there's different ways that you have to differentiate yourself in that sort of environment. And yeah, the profile of talent, I think Tan absolutely nailed. It's going to be somebody that wants to take on a broader range of challenges. I found candidates that bias to action tend to do really well in startups. They don't need direction. They're going to make it up. They're going to figure it out. And that's the reason that they're there. They're excited for an opportunity like that. Versus at Google doesn't want to get this thing wrong because it's going to impact a billion users. So they're going to have the specialists that are going to perfect this little thing versus a generalist at a startup who's going to take on this all these different challenges. So slightly different.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing. I just remember the story. One of the SVP for he was SVP of engineering at Jet, and previously he was the director of engineering at Google. And one of the things he said is, working at Google, there were a lot of A caliber talent, and at Jet.com, for example, there were so-called, he was like, don't tell anyone, but B caliber talent. But what he felt like the performance was, as a team, it was an A caliber team, versus in the A caliber, team filled with A caliber talent, he was managing a lot of egos, right? And not getting as much as done as he was with that subgroup of people. So I think that kind of changed my philosophy of how to kind of build a team, which is always you focus on the team, whatever it needs to build an A caliber team, and not necessarily the A caliber talent that everybody's going after and competing for, like crazy offer. And you probably know that, they're probably spending a lot of time in lead code and memorizing a lot of stuff to get that top interview score, but that doesn't necessarily make them the best engineers in the industry.
That's a great segue. I want to get into lead code and the hacker ranks of the world. Let's talk about interview process a bit, because I've probably talked to over, I don't know, 100, probably closer to 200 different TA and engineering leaders about their interview process, and generally there's like similar elements, but there's like little tweaks depending on like their philosophy. So maybe we'll start with Colin. Like, what have you seen to be kind of the most effective interview process for a number of things? One is to evaluate technical competency, also like the culture fit, and then of course optimizing for the candidate experience too, because the great candidates, they move quickly, and I've seen some companies, they just shoot themselves in the foot with, like, I don't know, interview processes that go on forever. So Colin, what do you think is an optimal, ideal interview process for a software engineer?
I mean, they do all have similar elements. There's going to be hiring manager interview, coding challenge of some sort, and then usually it's a final panel that you do a handful of things. You'll do like an architectural challenge of pair programming or similar. You'll have a soft skills interview, hiring manager close, that sort of thing. So there's definitely a recurring theme, some minor tweaks, definitely, but I think the industry sort of decided this is its best practice. So when you get a lot of similarity, something we do in the interview process, we try to differentiate ourselves a little bit, right? And that comes down to, how do we make our process more transparent, right? What's the candidate's experience actually interacting with us? And so to bring transparency, to bring meaningful dialogue that the candidate can connect with. There's a recruiter interview. You're going to be pitching kind of the company big picture. You'll have transparent conversations about compensation. Remember, it is in the top 5. So you're going to decide, does this make enough sense? You give them a good pitch, get them in front of the hiring manager. The hiring manager conducts an interview that's, again, pretty similar. But something that we ask is, hey, pitch the big picture of, where's this team going? What's the vision for the role? What's the impact? Kind of make sure that the candidate understands what they're getting into, can connect with the scope of the work, get excited about it. Because again, people are going to come to startups because they want to take on more responsibility. They want bigger projects. They want career growth, those sorts of things. So include that in the pitch. Then when you move to like technical interview, final rounds, individual interviewers, individual contributors are usually doing those. Have them articulate, what does it mean to work at Deepscribe? What does this journey look like for them? Why do they stay there? And have these things ready so that the candidate can connect on what's it like to be an employee. So adding those little bit of pitches, transparency, helping the candidate have meaningful conversations. Those are all things that we try to incorporate and differentiate ourselves in a process that's pretty similar everywhere that I've ever been.
No, I know we definitely talked about this in the pre-show about how you and your team at every stage are very focused on a little bit of a pitch at every stage to kind of like move that candidate, get the candidate a little bit more excited each time they meet, right? Because to your point, Deepscribe's not Google, right? Like people aren't coming in saying like, so you need a little bit of that extra push.
Yeah, it helps. I mean, obviously, if a candidate's like, "Oh, I want an offer from Google and I want an offer from Deepscribe," it's why Deepscribe? Because those are very different things. But like, we are competing for that caliber of talent. So, yeah, I think it's important that they connect. And I think the other thing is transparency. Like, can we, give them a good experience, but make sure they really understand what it's like. What are they committing to if they're going to be at a startup? We notice people perform well who are biased towards action, or they, those sorts of things. But make sure that they understand how they connect with the role.
Tan.
Yeah, I was gonna say, being intentional about the interview process, prepping your hiring manager, because the hiring manager who is the most engaged is more likely to close that candidate. So making sure that hiring manager is super involved. Also being strategic about how you put together that panel, right? If I know somebody who went to Alabama State and I have another employee that went to Alabama State, making sure like, okay, there's a way to kind of have that connection kind of sparks some conversation, or making sure that the panel is diverse to show like it accurately reflects the type of company you are, as well as the type of company you're trying to get to. Also, like, when people interview, like, as recruiters, we often forget what it's like to be a candidate. And when you're a candidate, you're constantly checking your email, like, how did I do in the interview? Like, what's the update? Is there any update? Right. So one thing I always did in my teams is that I told my team to like always give a no update. Oftentimes on a Friday, end of the week, you want to send a quick note saying, hey, I don't have an update. I know you interviewed with us. Thank you for that. Just no update. Simple gesture goes a long way, right? And that helps with the interview, the candidate experience aspect of that. Also, when there's an offer, making sure you give the whole package to your hiring manager, like, hey, this is what the candidate is looking for. These are the gaps, like, compensation, or they're looking for XYZ manager or XYZ problem. So then setting up a sales call or like a meet and greet, like coffee meeting. So that also improves the hiring manager experience, because even the hiring manager is anxious, right? That person is also under pressure to hire that person right away so that that person can help their team. And so it's like a fine line between, it comes down to experience. If you want to hire top talent, it's all about speed, quality, and diversity.
So I have a question for both of you guys. Have you ever had a little bit of pushback, and maybe not like overtly like I don't want to do that, but like I know I've had many engineers I've dealt with, and they can tell you something without actually saying it to you, where maybe they don't actually want to sell. Like they want to focus on like, hey, I'm here to do a technical interview. I want to find out if this person that's on the Zoom or sitting across from me knows how to code, right? And they're not super interested in the sales aspect of selling the job. Have you run into this before? And if you have, how do you kind of work that through, because it's such an important part of the process? And so I guess maybe the question is like, do you have people that sometimes that are interviewing that haven't fully bought in, and how do you kind of like, handle that? Maybe Colin, you can take that first.
I have seen that. And there's many companies that will require interviewing as a requisite to promotion. So this is a problem that many people can, many recruiters can run into. I think, reminding, one thing is it's important to have like an advocate in the engineering team. So, and ideally in this kind of situation, it's another interviewer, right?
Mhm.
Because the manager, of course, the manager is going to say, "Hey, I need you to, blah blah blah." It's your boss. Oh, my boss is griping on me about interviewing again. I guess I'll do it. That's not the direction you want to go. It's, oh man, that recruiter told on me. You're not going to build bridges that way. But if you can find an advocate on the team, somebody that they do connect with, that is on the interviewing team. Have them help this person understand the impact that they're having at the company, right? Because, and I'd mentioned it before, people come to startups to make an impact.
Mhm.
And how else are they doing that beyond just writing software? And that needs to become, we need to talk about these things in that sort of way. So like I say, usually the best way I've found is find an advocate that you can partner with who can help kind of course correct that interviewer.
Mhm.
I'm interested to see how Tan's run into this.
I'm sure you have, Tan.
I always say, like, whether you want the top player or the leftover, right? So if you want the top player, you have to be engaged. You have to be selling. You have to be, you have to kind of try to show why that person should work here. And if you are trying to be the old school traditional way of like, hey, like you apply, I'm gonna take the job, is gonna be the person who is going to struggle the most in getting another job. You will kind of put that effort and show to kind of get the job from you. So again, you want to hire the top talent, and top talents don't, like the shelf life for them is really, really short. And so it's up to you. Like, if you're okay with not getting the top talent, then again, it's a choice you make as a hiring manager or as a leader. And when it comes to actual individual engineer interviewing, that could also be a sense of burnout. Like sometimes what happens is that they have a lot of work they need to do at the same time. They don't have time to do like 3-4 interviews.
Mhm.
So also like showing empathy toward that engineer and say, hey, I understand. Is there a cadence that we can actually agree to, maybe two a week, right? And so when you show that human side of things, that people are a lot more likely to cooperate, and it doesn't it becomes a partnership, and it's no longer, hey, just recruiting it, just like putting interviews on my calendar, and I have so many deadlines, right? So that's the type of culture you want to cultivate in that space.
I think you bring up a good point. When I worked at the app development company, I'll be honest, I never met one engineer that was excited to interview. I never met one engineer that said to me, "Yes, I have 3 interviews this afternoon." Like, I just didn't find that, right? It was mostly like, "Oh man, I gotta do 3 interviews this afternoon." But to your point, like if you want A-list players, like the managers, yeah, they get more excited, but like the the ICs on the team, like they got stuff to do, right? Like I got code to write. Like it's just kind of getting in the way a little bit, right? So I think I like your feedback of having some empathy, right? Like understand that, hey, I know that you got 17 other things you got to do, but obviously this is really important because if you hire the right people, it's just going to make your job easier in the long run, right? I want to flip things to the candidate a bit because being in recruiting, candidates can be a little bit more, I guess, just open with us in terms of like their opinion. Like they'll just tell us stuff that they probably wouldn't sell like a direct company. And one thing I've heard is, I'm not doing a take home project. I just don't care. I'm not spending 3, 4, 2, whatever hours on a take home project. On the flip side, I've heard candidates say, I'm not doing live coding. If they're doing live coding, forget about it. Like I'm not even going to interview. So in those situations, have you run into candidates that have verbalized this to you, and have you ever changed your interview process to kind of accommodate a certain candidate? Or is it like, look, this is how we do it. you got to do it this way or not at all? Go ahead, Tan. Seems like you want to jump in.
Yeah, this is so one of the startup I worked at was called Amplify. They had three division of engineering, and they would all have separate interview process. One was pair coding. So you come for the day, spend 8 hours with another engineer and code the whole day, eat lunch together. The other process was panel interview. It was like a group of panel. There's like 4 or 5 engineers that will sit and they will all throw a question at you. And then the other one was that one-on-one setting, covering coding algorithm, problems, system design, all that stuff. What over the years, every system has pros and cons, but over the years, what I came to realize is that what is the goal of interview, right? Is to get a good picture of how you're going to do on day one at your work, as well as how you're going to be as a performer, right? Similar to like college admission, SAT, like it's a capture, it's a data, it's a small data, but it doesn't give you every data, right? So when it's a live coding, are you ever going to have a live coding session where you have to remember all the syntax in a job setting? Not really. You will have access to all these libraries, tools, right? At the same time, take home, like, if I'm busy as a senior engineer, do I really have time to spend 5 hours? And this says 5 hours, but if you really get into those projects, it could take 50 hours and you're still not done, right?
Yeah.
Because you can keep improving over and over. So none of them is realistic. The realistic is when it's a human setting, right? It's like, let's solve a problem together. If you need to look up any libraries, please go ahead, use that. Let's solve this together as if you're at work, right? And I think that those are the data point that gives the best picture of how you're going to be on day one at work.
Yeah. Colin, what about you? Have you run into this where candidates are kind of reluctant to follow the interview process?
Yeah, and I do wish there was a magic bullet to say, hey, this is how you build a perfect interview process. And I don't have that. Maybe Tan knows, and I'll get that from you after. But what we have decided to do, and what I've traditionally done, is structured interviewing. So it's a repeatable, similar process every time. The reason we do that is because if, as an interviewer, you start to see more and more solutions to the question that you're asking, you're going to start understanding certain things will stand out to you more, and certain things will, you'll realize there's potentially a lot more answers than even you thought of to the question. So it helps them understand. And then once you've seen people do the interview and then get hired, and then you see how they perform at work, it's like, okay, cool. These are indicators. So you get better as an interviewer as you go. So we've always indexed to that structured interview. And so what does that mean for candidates? Well, that means that we don't have options. This is our process. And we have traditionally, what's worked best for me is that it's a live coding interview. Working at startups, I think, I had mentioned earlier, no one knows who you are. So, if you're Google, for example, or if you're Amazon or whatever, and you have this huge employer brand, everybody knows who you are and what you're about as an employer. You can probably, if somebody applies, you could probably send them an automated test. They'll take it. But if it's a startup and no one knows who you are, and you're really trying to pitch this excellent candidate, if you just send them a take-home test, 7 out of 10 that get through the hiring manager stage, and we sent them a take-home test, 7 out of 10 would not take it.
Yeah.
As we had at one point at Expanse tried this, and huge drop-off from hiring manager to coding interview. It was over 9 out of 10 candidates would do the coding interview when it was live. But when we made it take home, 7 out of 10 would not take it. So that's why we really indexed and rotated towards that human interaction where, somebody will get on and give you a coding challenge. If you want privacy, they'll black out their screen, they'll mute, they'll let you go. But, it's an opportunity for you to meet somebody else, have a conversation at the very least. And if you have technical difficulties, there's support there too. So that's the way we've gone. Have candidates refuse to do it? Yes. It's a bummer, but
you ever had a candidate just like shut the laptop mid live coding interview? I've heard that happen quite a bit. Actually,
I've seen quite a bit.
Yeah.
We've all seen different, different reactions from people, and I mean, it's stressful. Interviewing is stressful. So
totally.
I think that's something we all have to remember. Tanner said it earlier, empathize, understand. He was talking about understanding interviewers, understanding employees, gotta understand the candidates too. It's tough.
It's so funny. I was working at the app development company. I used to joke with the developers because I would tell them, because we're in an office, right? So I used to tell them, we didn't actually have an IT person, but I would like tell them, I was like, hey guys, I'm gonna go to IT today. I'm gonna have them block Stack Overflow. And you just see everyone like kind of sweating. They're like, you're really serious? Are you serious? And I'm like, what would happen if I block Stack Overflow? What would happen to your day-to-day job? Like, would you be able to function? And they're like, I don't know if I can function. So it's just interesting. We go and interview people. We put them in these live coding tests with like, we're like, hey, you gotta like write me code on the spot. Anyways, we got 2 minutes left. So really quickly, I want to ask about just kind of looking forward to the future. Is there something that's kind of really exciting for you in this space, whether like is a tool or a use of something like maybe like AI or some type of process or something that you're hearing in the marketplace that you're really excited about that you think could really drive the future of technical recruiting into, the back half of this decade? Let's start with Tan.
Well, I can say I'm excited about the fact that more and more people from different backgrounds are coming into tech, and so it's becoming more and more diverse. When I started my career, I remember we're just poaching diverse talent from each other rather than increasing the overall population. And now, the ecosystem is, kids thinks it's cool to be a developer, right? So that helps. So for recruiting also, in terms of, the data-driven decision making that comes into hiring, firing, and pretty much, how do you kind of build a great company? So people are really paying attention, and the culture of that ecosystem is maturing. I think there's a lot of exciting stuff that is going to happen in the space of recruiting, especially with AI. Like now that we're sourcing, AI is already helping people in my team, for example, finding the best talent, finding diverse talent all over the world. So yeah, I'm pretty excited to see what next to come.
Yeah, for sure. And Colin, what about yourself?
I mean, AI is something I'm very excited about. And I think it's something that we have to embrace as recruiters. I hear, and you'll hear this broadly in every industry, artificial intelligence, is it going to replace us? Right. And I don't think so. I think that if you think about the recruiting function, there's like 3 buckets, right? There's sourcing, there's interviewing and managing a process, and there's closing. The recruiter's most meaningful time is that closing, that's getting people hired. That's your goal, right? But we probably only spend 10% of our time there. We spend probably 90% of our time managing a process and sourcing talent. So can AI start to take some of that sourcing responsibility? Can it start taking outreach? Can it help us reduce bias when it comes to understanding resumes? I think these are all opportunities in the industry. I would see if these become things, then I would imagine recruiters have the opportunity to probably support more recs, have more bandwidth, be able to focus more on that process, that candidate experience, and the closing portion. Right. And start to pivot away a little bit from sourcing, start having resumes stack ranked by machines that actually reduce bias, that do better than people at reading resumes. These are all opportunities. So that's I think that's what I'm most excited about, is to see what's next. How is this going to evolve now with AI?
Well, with that, I mean, spoiler alert, we've been doing that for 7 years over here at Rocket. So maybe we need to chat, Colin. But Tan, Colin, thank thank you so much for both of you joining us. I learned a ton today. I hope you guys did as well. Hopefully you guys connect. And yeah, for anyone listening, Tan's a free agent. This guy's one of the best recruiters out there. So if you're looking for a talent leader, this might be your chance. Guys, I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks so much for joining. And until next time, happy hunting.